This story comes from the Wall Street Journal. It is Trump gears up for assault on wokeness with education overhaul. And Ben, this is maybe the most exciting thing that I've seen within the collegiate space in quite some time. The colleges, particularly the Ivy League universities, a lot of these places that politicians and Republicans have come from, even have really felt like a lost battleground. It's felt like those have just been ceded to the left and they're completely gone. But Trump is kind of putting up a little bit of a fight here, and not really a little one. He's talking about making some changes to the accreditation system that the federal government uses to determine which schools are able to get federal funding. And, if a school loses its accreditation, it essentially ceases to be a school, right? Your degree is meaningless except for the meaning that other people vaguely give it to it. And so I find this to be a very effective way to say, hey, we'd like to stop the racial bias that happens in admissions. Hey, we'd like to stop seeing DEI hiring, within these administrations. We'd like to stop seeing, sort of these activist class of professors who are not interested in necessarily teaching their subject, but are interested in having a captive audience for whatever they feel like, came up on the news that day.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly support this. I think this is going to be, if executed correctly, this could be a really monumental shift in American culture. Some people might think that this is an overreach. I think some people like to imagine that the government shouldn't be meddling with education. Education should be this neutral, objective thing. But the fact is, it's not neutral, either in its messaging or the power structures involved. And a lot of times, the education system does kind of function as just an arm of the government. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for Trump to take these steps to clean up the education system, problems that people have been talking about for a very long time, particularly when functionally a lot of these leftist agendas in schools are actually destabilizing the country. Like, if the education system is teaching American citizens that America is evil, not just that we've done some questionable things or some objectively wrong things, but that as a whole, from its inception, it is evil and that you should feel bad about being an American, that is completely contrary to the purpose of an American system. Like, why would you undermine yourself? It's suicide. So I think this is great, and I hope it's successful.
Well, and we've seen Trump, yet again sort of make this outsized use of the executive branch, right? Even saying that he threatens to, put in new laws or new executive orders that tax the endowments, which, are in the hundreds of millions for some of these universities. This is really where a lot of their money is kept. And it's what allows them to sort of act independently in a lot of cases. This is Trump really going on the offensive. I think, you touched on it a little bit, but I want to just condense the question down. I think cultural change is very important. And I think that the way that we go about it is equally important. Is the government the tool to enforce cultural change, right? Particularly in this case, as it relates to education. It wasn't necessarily the government that came in and made them left wing. Certainly they were a part of that. But is it now the government's job to make them more in the middle or potentially even conservative?
I think yes. Because I think you could argue it's a national security issue. Like, if it is actively undermining public opinion of America, it's destructive to the country. So you could argue I think you could argue it would be an overreach to try to take all of these institutions and flip all of their messaging 180 to be like explicitly conservative all the time. Like maybe that would be an overstep, but I think at minimum curbing the anti-American rhetoric that is coming out of these institutions is yeah, I think it's I think it's fully within the scope of the government. I think so cultural change can come from the top down, and I think sometimes it comes from the bottom up. But I legitimately think that cultural change frequently does come from the top down because the top, and that could either be government or it could be the media, it could be the thought leaders, but the top is kind of setting the tone for um, what's acceptable to think and do. And there have been many times in this country where um, a policy has changed or something has become legal, and like that's like the green light culturally, and so people will just naturally start to accept that because we're so tied to this idea of legal or illegal. We're very legalistic in our mindset sometimes, and so I think change can come from the top down. And in this case, I think it really should because we're in a bit of a crisis here.
Well, and I think, maybe even should, partially because these are not independent, colleges many of the time. These are state-run colleges. These are, colleges that are dependent on federal funding in order to survive. And so whereas I was sort of prepared to maybe push back against like the idea of it as a national security issue because there is free speech, right? That like certainly the things, that the belief that America is evil has to be permitted under free speech. But it doesn't necessarily have to be funded with our tax dollars.
Yeah, why are we subsidizing revolution? I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves here is like, that is, like I said before, like that is suicide. That is cutting yourself off the knees. That is working against your intended purpose. Like it's one thing to say, okay, we've done some wrong things. Let's think about those and course correct. It's an entirely different thing to say, oh, we've been bad from the beginning, and the character and the spirit of America is wrong and evil. That's like somebody who's depressed who just catastrophizes and thinks, oh, I'm such a terrible person, I can't do anything right, and then they never fix their life. It's like that is not a pragmatic or an ethical approach to this situation.
Well, I think it'll be very interesting to see how Trump kind of continues to wield the executive, maybe in ways that we haven't seen before.